another video and another opera, of which its recordings we're going to go through. This time it's going to be Vincenzo Bellini's Norma. From the lineage from Giuditta Pasta through to Adelina Patti. Well, we do have, Adelina Patti's recording of her Casta Diva, but that was made when she was like way out of form. So we're gonna ignore that today, and we're gonna take a look at a few recordings that are worth getting, and a few that aren't. So usually I would start with checkpoints and which words, which phrases to listen to, but Norma is just such a big role that it's impossible to pinpoint here and there what you have to listen to. You actually have to listen to the full opera to determine whether or not the title role is adequately sung, so to speak. And I'll go through all of the scenes and what you should listen to in those scenes. Of course, we'll start with the title character. Norma comes in with her Casta Diva. You want legato, and that's all you want from Casta Diva. Beautiful legato singing. Preferably there are some fluctuations in dynamics. The top B flats should be solid in nature, and if you can, just pull out a pianissimo here and there, or some crescendo, decrescendos, something like that. And then we have the cabaletta that follows that, which is A bello a me ritorna. Nothing too special about this cabaletta, but the two top Cs have to be sung with volume, and those are difficult high Cs to sing, but not the most difficult ones in this role. After all, Lili Lehmann said that she would rather sing 4 Gotterdammerung Brunhildes than 1 Norma, which I can see where she's coming from. We continue in Norma's scenes. The next one is her first duet with Adalgisa. What we should hear here, the aria part of the duet, O Rimembranza. Again, just legato singing, and if the legato is there, it's good singing, and you should hear, a beautiful blend with Adalgisa. The harmony should be there. She shouldn't be trying to overpower Adalgisa, not at all, because you hear stuff like Cosotto, the Adalgisa, always trying to overshine the Norma, but the result is always terrible. So if it blends well, if it has a good harmony, then it's good. And then the cabaletta part of the duet, this first duet with Adalgisa, A si fa core abbracciami. This one, 2 high Cs. The first one is solo, and the second one is above Adalgisa's line. And the solo high C has to be sung. Well, Callas, she pulled off a diminuendo on this one. So if the Norma has the vocal capability to do some vocal fluctuations, some dynamics on a top note, then it's probably a good one. Of course, Adalgisa also has a high C in this cabaletta, and well, given that Adalgisa is actually a role written for a soprano, it should be a note that the interpreter of Adalgisa has, but for some reason mostly mezzo sing it in our recordings, but that's okay. Some mezzos still hit the C anyway. Then comes the most difficult part of Norma, I believe, O non tremare. This is difficult, not just because of the 2 naked high Cs that she has to blast out at full volume, but because before and after those particular high Cs, it's a very, very tricky, coloratura passages that many sopranos, well, I would say so, if the soprano has the agility of handling those coloratura lines, usually they won't have a big enough and powerful enough high C to blast for those 2 high Cs. If they do have a powerful voice that they can blast out at full volume, they usually don't have the coloratura and the agility in this scene in particular. That's why this is, I believe, the most difficult to execute in the whole opera of Norma. So you could consider this a checkpoint, but the rest is just as difficult to sing, so I won't particularly pinpoint on this particular excerpt. And then the next scene of Norma uh, is Perfido or Basti, which is the Act 1 finale. Well, it would always be preferable if she takes the high D natural, which is always a showstopper. But for the sopranos who don't have this note, in their range, at least the Norma has to rise above Allergies and Pollione. It has to, dominate over these two voices because Norma is the lead character, the main character here. So it should be louder and more powerful than Adalgisa and Boglione's lines. And then we come to the second act. The first excerpt, I shall say, in the second act is the second duet with Adalgisa. What we should hear here, well, it starts, the recitative part, mi chiamo Norma, there's nothing special there. But at, Mira o Norma, starting there, of course, Norma has her solo lines here. Before, they do, sing in harmony at the same time. For those solo lines of Norma, before the harmony, the high A flats there should preferably be sung, piano. It should be floated. If it's too solid, too stiff, it doesn't have the effect that those particular A flats should have, And then when, they go into the duet itself, again, just legato singing, beautiful singing, harmony, and it's beautiful to the ears, and that is what you want from the Norma here. And then to the cabaletta part of the of this duet, fino all'ore estreme. Again, just nothing special, but you have to hit the high C's with power, yeah. And then Norma's next scene is a short one, E tornerà, but it also has two high C's. And the one before Clotilde comes in, it's in the cadenza, and that's why it's naked. And that cadenza should be sung gently. The C should be, floated. It should be piano, sung piano, because it is a pensive, a very pensive and inwards sort of subdued cadenza. However, the next high C, after Clotilde comes in, that one should be much more powerful because they're just talking about blood and, the tormenting flowing blood. And of course, it has to be powerful. So you have to hear in this particular excerpt the difference between the piano high C before Clotilde and the other high C after Clotilde, which should be sung ad forte and with power. And then comes the final scene, which is itself broken into a few segments. The first one is In mia man al fin tu sei. Now, this first part of the final scene has to be sung with a lot of chest voice. You need the chest voice. You need the presence there. Why? Because Norma here, she's asserting Pollione, and she sort of threatens him, yeah? So you have to have the power, you have to have the imposing quality, and how do you get that with a female voice? You use chest voice, you have to sound like, a man in order to, convince Pollione. And that is why the chest voice is very important here. Yeah, if you don't have the chest voice, then it's not gonna work. It's not gonna have the theatrical, dramatical effect, whatever you call it. And this whole first part of In Mia Man, it lies rather low. That's why the chest voice should be there. But the change comes in I romani accento accento. That part, well, Norma just has to go wild, and I'll play an example of what wild truly sounds like. But even if you just go absolutely batshit and sing wildly here, it's not quite enough. Why? Because the trills written here are the real difficulty of this particular excerpt, I romani accento, and those trills are absolutely killer. And let's listen to how it should be executed. Can't deny the theatrical effect, the dramatic effect of those particular trills, and they should be executed perfectly, in my opinion, which, of course, not a lot of people at all can do. But if that happens, then it's what you want, yeah. The second part of the final scene, I would say, qual cor tradisti. This part, that's basically soft singing. If you have the soft singing, it should be there. Pensive legato. You have to be able to float the voice without sounding too stiff, and that's what you want in qual cor tradisti. The same, a little bit of the same can be said for the final part of the final scene, de non valerli vittime. The first part, it shouldn't be as floaty, it shouldn't be as aerated as qual cor tradisti. There should be a vocal solidity there. However, throughout that vocal solidity, you also want a tear-like quality, a bit of a more sorrowful voice, and a bit more plaintive in terms of the expression of emotion, and that has to change at the very end, very end of the opera, where the tone has to become much more solemn as she walks into the fire and whatnot, and that solemn tone has to be backed up by a powerful voice, a voice that soars above the orchestra, and the very powerful high B at the very end to just thoroughly deliver the dramatic effect of this amazing final scene. For the rest of the roles, there really aren't, that much to talk about. Adalgisa, of course. I just think that Adalgisa is actually a soprano role, and there are some mezzos who label themselves as mezzos, but obviously they're just undeveloped sopranos. And those undeveloped sopranos who label themselves as mezzos go and do Adalgisa, which is considered a mezzo role, but is actually a soprano role. So let's just take, for example, Fiorenza Cosotto. I think that she's not a mezzo, she is an undeveloped soprano, but she also did soprano roles such as Adalgisa, and that's why for roles like Adalgisa and Santuzza, I like Cosotto because, well, she provides the vocalisms of a self-proclaimed mezzo, trying to sound like a mezzo, but in the soprano roles, and that is a good effect for actual soprano roles like Santuzza and Adalgisa. However, I am not a fan at all of Cosotto's, let's say, Amneris and Azucena, because she's not a true mezzo, and that's why I think that Adalgisa is Cosotto's best role, because she can sing with lyricism, and she can sing with nuances, but she's just not a true mezzo. Anyway, for Adalgisa, you just want both agility and the softness of singing, It's not as, dramatic as the role of Norma requires. There isn't that much blasting and powerful declaiming. Algisa just has to be soft singing, and that's it. For Pollione, a very difficult tenor role, if I do say so myself. Of course, Bellini writes the high C in Me quel l'altar di Venere, but how many people do that? Not many. If the high C is there, then of course it's perfect. But most people don't take it anyway. The Monaco in the Cabaletta, he even just skips the part with the B flat, high B flat. That it's only in the late performances of his Pollione though. Pollione, as long as a dramatic voice, it's imposing and it doesn't get drowned out by everyone else, then it's okay. You don't want a small voice like Pavarotti singing Pollione. That's not what you want. And Oroveso, well, just don't get drowned by the chorus, because all of Oroveso's part are choral parts. And when I went to hear Norma live, I could not hear the Oroveso sing one single word because he was constantly drowned by the choir. And if the Oroveso is audible, it's a good Oroveso because there really isn't that much going on in this role. Let's talk about our recordings, shall we then? Of course, our first category, good and commercially available recordings. The first one I've chosen is from 1937 in studio, with the orchestra and chorus of the Rai Torino, conducted by Vittorio Gui. Norma is Gina Signa, Allegisa is Ebe Stignani, Pollione is Giovanni Brevario, and Oroveso is Tancredi Pasero. Gina Signa's Norma, she definitely had the voice for Norma. That's what I'm going to say. She had a dramatic voice, she had the chest tones, she had a big enough voice to, blast out the notes in Norma that it has to be blasted. She has that. However, she is a bit, bulky when it comes to the coloratura passages, and it would not be, unexpected for Signa, who was singing Turandots and stuff like that. Although she does do a valiant effort at trying to, go through those coloratura passages. It's not too bad. It's not that bad. But she does, have legato singing, and she has the dramatic temperament for Norma, and she can blast those notes and stuff. Ebe Stignani as Adalgisa. Stignani is by far my favorite mezzo, and by far my favorite Adalgisa. For one reason, her singing can be very dramatic, like her Azucena, but here as Adalgisa, she truly, exploits the true beauty of her voice. She's still quite young here, 1937. She's 35 here. She really brings out the beauty in her voice, which is often, overshadowed by her dramatic temperament when she has to sing dramatically in most dramatic mezzo roles, so to speak. Adalgisa is a great vehicle for her to just sing softly, and with the beauty of the voice itself. It's a dark, voluptuous tone that you don't often hear in Stignani's recordings in the more dramatic parts. And that's why Stignani's Adalgisa is one that I absolutely adore. Pollione here is Giovanni Brevario. A bit strained here, a bit of a tired voice, I would say, in this recording, and that's not helped by Mr. Gui's slow tempi. But it is a dramatic voice for sure. It has, the dramatic temperament. Reminds me a bit of Giovanni Martinelli. It's not bad, but it's just not very youthful and very fresh and very, refreshing to the ear. Tancredi Pasero is a great bass, and his Oroveso is quite notable for the beauty of tone, and that's what you want from an Oroveso, honestly. Our next inclusion is not one, but two related recordings. These are the two studio recordings of Maria Callas in the title role of Norma, made in studio. Both of them are conducted by Tullio Serafin with the orchestra of La Scala. The first one is from 1954 and the second one from 1960. The first one features Adalgisa is Ebe Stignani, Pollione is Mario Filippeschi, and Oroveso is Nicola Rossi Lemeni. The second one from 1960 has Krista Ludwig as Adalgisa, Franco Corelli as Pollione, and Nicola Zaccaria as Oroveso. By comparing these two recordings, I think that the 1960 is better. Why? 1954 obviously has Callas in better voice, but that better voice, a more rounded, dramatic soprano voice, did not record well in studio in 1954 because, well, she was going under weight loss in 1954, that particular year, and that's why her voice thinned down, and it was not in very good shape in this 1954 recording. And given that we have live recordings of her normas from 1950, 1952, 1955, that 54 just seems a bit redundant to me. However, Stignani is in good form as usual, although they did sing, Stignani did sing Adalgisa to Callas Norma in the 1952 live recording in London, which I will talk about later. Stignani's Adalgisa is still in good form in the 1954 studio. Mario Filippeschi is an outstanding Pollione, and Rossi Lemeni is a rounded and beautiful Oroveso, has the beauty of tone. Mario Filippeschi's Pollione, might I add, has a very, spada voce, a sword-like voice, a very sharp-edged one that just cut through the orchestra, and it is a perfect voice for the role of Pollione. But, this isn't the most important Norma recording because of the abundance of live Callas sets. The one in 1960 in studio, however, is different because firstly, there aren't any Normas from this period. I think Callas dropped the role after the 1958 disaster at Roma. Not a disaster, she just pulled out. She was actually in good voice that night, but she didn't think that it was good enough. Anyways, we don't have Callas Norma until 1965 in her Paris final Normas. Those weren't very good. I'm not going to talk about them today. But the 1960 in studio, it is a very nuanced Norma. She is not in particularly good voice, but it is still much better compared to the 64, 65 Paris ones. She has a kind of thinned out voice, but in that thinned out voice you can hear the nuances, the details of the score, the dynamics, and the emotions of singing. She really put that kind of thorough reading of the role, not just vocally unbeatable like her earlier Normas, but also interpretationally much more detailed and nuanced than her live and previous studio recordings. Krista Ludwig as Adalgisa, I think it is a very interesting casting decision and a very good one. I don't think that most people would agree with this, but Krista Ludwig, she had a voice that was not only suited to the German repertoire, she could also do, bel canto, Bellini here very well, because there is a natural beauty of tone in Mrs. Ludwig's timbre, and that beauty of tone is used very aptly as Adalgisa. Franco Corelli's Pollione here is a bit, toned down in terms of excitement and dramatism and volume in studio, but it is still, nuanced, it is still a detailed reading of the role. Just, under studio conditions, it's never the best, portrayal of what Corelli's voice was actually supposed to be. Zaccaria here as Oroveso, a very good bass voice. He also appeared in a lot of other recordings of Norma with Callas, but here in studio he benefited from the conditions and brought out the beauty of tone in his voice. The next set of recordings I will talk about, again, it's a double bill, it's not a single one, but these are the two commercially available, so to speak, live recordings of Callas Norma. Now, I'm not suggesting that the other, recordings of Carlos Norma aren't commercially available, but these two are particularly easy to find on the market. These are the 1952 live recording at Covent Garden under Vittorio Gui, and the 1955 live at La Scala under Antonino Votto. Let's talk about the cast first. The first one from 1952 as Ebestignani as Adalgisa, Mirto Picchi as Polione, Giacomo Vacchi as Oroveso, and Joan Sutherland, a very young one, as Clotilde. For the second one at La Scala, Giulietta Simeonato is Adalgisa, Mario Del Monaco is Polione, Nicola Zaccaria is Oroveso, and Giuseppe Zampieri is Flavio. Let's talk about the first one. 1952. In terms of, vocal power and the dramatic temperament of Norma, this is superior to 1955, although, generally speaking, it is inferior to 1955 La Scala. But from this performance, Callas is in very good vocal shape, of course. She brings out the nuances, particularly in the duets with Stignani. I've mentioned that in the studio 1954 it isn't, utilized to the best voice, but here Callas and Stignani blend beautifully, absolutely beautifully. Their Mira Norma here is perhaps the best version of this duet that exists out there, and both of them are in good shape here, although it would take another 3 years for Callas to fully portray the role dramatically and vocally. Mirto Picchi is Polione here, a bit of a, cardboard, a dry voice. Never have been a big fan of Picchi, but he has the dramatic temperament for the role. Vacchi as Oroveso, nothing really special, and Sutherland as Clotilde here is a great addition. It's curious to hear what she sounded like in her very young years. The second one, from 1955, live at La Scala, conducted by Antonino Votto. This is, well, as most of you should know, this is the recording of Norma, and I would suggest that, this be the first Norma you purchase, because all things considered, it's perhaps the best, Norma we have out there. Callas here in 1955, live, not the radio broadcast one, which I will talk about later. This one live at La Scala from 1955. Her singing here, vocally, is even better than the 50 Mexico and the 52 London. Because her voice, I would say, in 1955 has just, transformed itself into being the perfect voice for Norma. Let's just say that the role of Norma, a very demanding one, there's a mold for this role, and after, 5 years of trying to fit into this role, Callas' voice perfectly encompassed the vocal requirements and the vocalisms of the role of Norma. And of course, in 1955, her dramatic temperament is at its peak, and her interpretation, her musicality, is also, gradually increasing. So we're at a point where her musicality is at a very high level, but her voice and her dramatic temperament hasn't started to decrease down slope. And that is why this Norma is Callas' best and the best recording of Norma, I believe, out there. Giulietta Simeonato is Adalgisa here. There are later recordings of Simeonato's Adalgisa where she is in poorer voice. This is her in her vocal peak. I believe her not to be a full mezzo. She is a true mezzo, but not a full one. She's more of a falcon soprano, if you know what that is. And a falcon soprano is brilliant for the role of Adalgisa. The high C is sung perfectly. It is the best Adalgisa high C that I've heard from Simeonato from 1955. Del Monaco is Polione here. This is his best Polione and one of his finest recordings all around, because under Callas, he never wanted to lose to Callas, he always wanted to be the star of the recording, and that's why in any opera he tries to outshine Callas, and he tries his very best here. Vocally speaking, impeccable, the dramatic temperament, all of that is there. And although he tries to outshine Callas, he still blends perfectly with her voice in their duets. The characterization is there, the idiomatic singing is there, and all things considered, this is I might consider the best performance of Apollyon that we have seen. Then, our next recording is from 1965. It's conducted by Gianandrea Gavazzeni, and it is from La Scala. It has Leila Hencher as Norma, Giulietta Simeonato as Algisa, Bruno Prevedi as Pollione, and Nicola Zaccaria as Oroveso. Now, I've seen 2 dates of this recording. I've seen one from the 9th of January and one from the 13th of January. I listened to both, I compared both, and I've come to the conclusion that it's the same recording. So basically, only one night from this run was recorded, and there's just some mislabeling going on that led people to believe that there were 2 separate recordings from 2 separate dates. That's not true, there's only one. I don't know from the 9th or the 13th, but there's only one recording. That one from 1965 La Scala, obviously Leila Hencher as Norma. They booed her even before she had started singing because the La Scala audience thought that nobody could replace Callas ever as Norma. That is true, but I think their thoughts of only Callas will ever do this role justice. That, however, is wrong. Leila Hencher's Norma is not on the level of Callas' Norma, but it also does the role justice. And what's a Norma that is? Hencher from La Scala, 1965. Wow, the singing here, I would say that it is not as nuanced and not as emotionally pensive as the one from 1964 at Buenos Aires, which I will include later on in this video, and not as wild as the excerpts from Verona and Napoli, both of which I will talk about in the 6th category, good recordings of excerpts. But all things considered, it was very, very difficult for Hencher to be interpreting Norma, this massive role, under the shadow of Callas, because the audience at La Scala, they are expecting the very best, and before she had even sung, they were booing her because they knew that she wasn't going to be at the level of Callas. But I think she silenced every one of those non-believers, and her Norma here, maybe the nerves got to her. It wasn't as emotionally moving and pensive as the other ones, but is a very vocally solid Norma, and all things considered, it is a very good portrayal of her Norma. Her better recordings, though, I will mention a bit later in the video. Simeonato here as Algisa, I believe 1965 was one of her last years singing, and it is not in very good voice here. It's a bit strained in places, and it is not her best Algisa by any means. Bruno Prevedi as Pollione here is a pleasant surprise. When I listen to him in other roles like Manrico or Calaf, it reminds me a bit of monotonous, more cardboard singing. But here, he does bring out the nuances and the appropriate vocalism, the dramaticism for the role of Pollione. Then, our last recording in this first category is from 1972. It's also conducted by Gianandrea Gavazzeni at La Scala, but this one has Montserrat Caballé as Norma, Fiorenza Gusotto as Adalgisa, Gianni Raimondi as Pollione, and Ivo Vinco as Oroveso. This is probably the most famous audio recording of Caballé's Norma. Well, I think that Caballé's Norma is half good, half average. The average part is, of course, the dramatic singing parts, where dramaticism, all of that. She doesn't have the vocal solidity of the voice. It simply isn't red hot, dramatic, Italianate, dramatic soprano temperament. She simply doesn't have that, and that makes up half of the role of Norma. But for the other half of the role of Norma, she, Monsieur Caballé, she does that, half incredibly, absolutely incredibly. Those half that I mentioned is, Mira Norma, Casta Diva, Qual Corradisti, De Non Volerli Vittime, all these parts where, soft and floating, fil di voce singing is necessary, and I don't think that there has been a better interpreter of Norma in terms of that, soft singing half. And this is relatively early for Caballé's Normas, 1972. Fiorenza Cosotto is Alogisa here. I've mentioned that I think that Cosotto is Alogisa is Cosotto's best role, and I've explained my reasoning behind that. And Cosotto, in all her recordings of Alogisa, at least in the 70s, she sings equally well, and the let's say the vocal, softness, the lyricism of singing hasn't escaped her yet, as would happen later on in her career, and she is in good form here as Alogisa. Caballé's Norma is also in good form here. Gianni Raimondi is a more lyric tenor Pollione, but it isn't lacking in dramatic temperament at all. It is more a lyric voice per se, but the dramatic temperament is present, and it is very, very conspicuous in the big parts of singing. Ivo Vinco is a decent Oroveso. It is a voiced one. It has, nuance. It has soft singing and all of that. So all things considered, it's a great recording of Norma as well. Then we come to our second category. These recordings are a bit more rare to find, a bit harder to find, but they're equally as good as the commercially available ones. The first one I've chosen is, again, from 1937. I'm featuring Gina Signa, but this time it's live at the Met. Adalgisa is Bruna Castagna, Pollione is Giovanni Martinelli, and Oroveso is Ezio Pinza. Signa live. I think her live Norma is, of course, more dramatic than her studio one, but at the same time, it isn't as nuanced and as, how should I say? She doesn't, do those coloratura passages as well as she could in the studio, because it's live, obviously, and the nuance just doesn't bring up that much here in this live recording. However, she is singing absolutely wild in this Norma. The dramatic temperament of her Norma here live is one of the best I've ever heard, one of the most dramatic, and she's going all out with this Norma, and you can't deny it at all. Bruna Castagna's Alogisa is a bit on the more unrefined side, but the nuance of Adalgisa singing is still there. She obviously had intonation problems, but it doesn't bother me too much. Giovanni Martinelli here in the 30s is still a good voice. Obviously he's lost a bit of youth and a bit of freshness to his voice when compared to his recordings in the 20s, but it's not as bad as the absolutely cardboard, uninspiring, monotonous singing that he would give in the 40s and 50s. It's still an inspiring Pollione. It's of course dramatically a very dramatic Martinelli, a very dramatic Pollione. The dramatic temperament is there, and Ezio Pinza as Oroveso is a bit of luxurious casting. What could go wrong with Pinza as Oroveso? Then we have, for our next inclusion, another double bill. This one, both of these recordings are from 1944, live at the Metropolitan Opera, with Cesare Sodero conducting and Zinka Milanov in the title role. For the first one, it is from February the 12th. It has Bruna Castagna as Alogisa, Frederick Jägel as Pollione, and Virgilio Lazzari as Oroveso. For the second one, from the 30th of December, Frederick Jägel repeats Pollione, but Adalgisa is sung by Jenny Turrell this time, and Norman Cordon is Oroveso. these two recordings, I would say they're pretty, similar in terms of Milov's singing here. And let's talk about her Norma. People would say that her Norma is too, matronly, is too old lady, and it is not agile enough. I partly agree. Her voice has always been, more old lady than anything else. But I think that is part of the contributing factor to her dramatic temperament that she obviously had, and that dramatic temperament is very useful in singing Norma. Of course, Milanov in the 40s still had a fresh voice, still had a decent vocalism, still had the coloratura going on. It's a bit bulky and it's a bit, awkward trying to navigate through those coloratura passages here for Milanov. But all things considered, it's a well-sung Norma. The high Cs are there, everything is there, the dramaticism is there, and it is a valiant effort by Milanov, I must say. For the rest of the cast, Frederick Jägel in both performances, he's in good voice. He's not exactly a dramatic tenor, but he is a lyric tenor with incredible dramaticism and Italian temperament, and he makes a fairly applaudable Pollione. Bruna Castagna's Adalgisa I've talked about. Jenny Turrell is not very special as Adalgisa. And for the two Orovezos, Norman Corden is slightly better than Virgilio Lazzari. Now for the third recording, we have one from 1950, live from Mexico, Palacio de las Bellas Artes, conducted by Guido Pico. Norma is Maria Callas, Adalgisa Giulietta Simeonato, Pollione is Kurt Baum, and Orovezo is Nicola Moscona. Callas Norma here in 1950. Well, I wouldn't say it isn't, interpretation oriented. It has interpretation, it has very good interpretation. She has soft singing here, she has pensive tear like singing here, but I think that the whole performance is more vocal oriented. She has absolutely powerful high Cs here. The coloratura passages are done with full voice, wild runs, and all of that is there. But in comparison to her later recordings, later live ones from 52 and 55, which I've mentioned, it just lacks a bit in terms of the interpretation. Giulietta Simeonato is obviously in even better form here than in 55. The vocal freshness is more obvious. The nuance is similar, and it is generally a more exciting performance from Callas and Simeonato here in terms of the dramaticism and the exciting aspect of the opera of Norma. Kurt Baum as Pollione is off-putting, honestly. He is a good voice, in terms of, having the sharp edge and having a sword-like quality, but unlike Filipeschi, Kurt Baum does not have much musicality. He tends to yell through his parts, which is what he does with Pollione here. There's not much nuance, there's not much interpretation, there's no musicality, and he also gets lost in his aria, Me colta rivenere. Not a good performance by Mr. Baum. And Nicola Moscona is not very notable as Orovezo as well. But Callas and Simeonato are an absolute perfect vocal form here, very exciting singing, and that is already a recording of Norma worth listening to. Next, we have a recording from 1958, conducted by Gabriele Santini, with the orchestra and chorus of the Rome Opera. Anita Cerqueti is Norma, Miriam Pirazzini is Adalgisa, Franco Corelli is Pollione, and Giulio Neri is Orovezo. Now, obviously, this is a very famous performance because, well, Callas, with her famous Rome Opera scandal, cancelled after the first act, which was in the 2nd of January, 1958. This full recording is from 4th January, where Cerqueti was, I believe, singing in Napoli, and with very short notice, she flew into Rome to replace Callas, making her house debut in Roma, because she was not a big name at all. Not many people knew about Mrs. Cerquetti before this performance, but she was in absolutely perfect form in this performance. She did not record much, obviously. She had a very short career, but this, I would believe, is the highlight of her career, and it is obviously something that all Cerquetti fans have listened to. And for non-Cerquetti fans, it is, the gateway to introduce you to this great artist. She has the dramatic temperament, she has the coloratura passages, she has the soft singing, she has the nuance, but the most conspicuous feature is her Italianate, red-hot dramatic temperament that was not very common in her times already. Corelli's Pollione is, as usual, in very good form. Probably a bit challenged by the loss of, Callas in Norma, but it gave him an opportunity to shine, while, in comparison to having Callas as Norma, this gave him more of an opportunity to sing more outwards and more, more show-stopping, so to speak, and he does that here in this live recording. It is a very well sung Pollione. Giulio Neri is a very good Oroveso, a very voluminous, a dark voice which soared above the choir, but Miriam Pirazzini here as Adalgisa is a bit underwhelming. Just not a very big voice, a bit too thin and too soprano-ish for my liking as Adalgisa. Now we have a recording from 1964 conducted by Bruno Bartoletti at the Teatro Colon. It has Leila Hinger as Norma, Adriana Lazzarini as Adalgisa, Bruno Prevedi as Pollione, and William Wilderman as Oroveso. In comparison to the 1965 Scala Norma, Hinger is a bit more interpretive here. A year before that, maybe because it's not in Italy, it's not that demanding an audience, but Hencher sings with more nuance here, with more soft and pleasing singing. It's more more interpretive, more pensive, more emotionally oriented than her Scala Norma. Lazzarini, however, Adriana Lazzarini, is a letdown as Adalgisa. Not a very nuanced and a refined voice, which makes, the duets with Hinger a bit less in, artistic value, which, and I think compared to the performance in Napoli, which I'll talk about later, Hinger doesn't sing with as much, floating of the high notes. She doesn't float that much, and the voice is not as fil di voce, so to speak. But Hencher is very interpretive here. It is very emotional and pensive singing. Bruno Prevedi is still a very good Pollione here. William Wilderman is a very weak Oroveso. Not a fan of that. But this is Hencher's a very good Norma by Hencher. Next, for our third category, we have recordings that are overlooked, dark horses, as I would like to call them. The first one is from 1955, conducted by Tullio Serafin with the orchestra and chorus of Rai Roma. It is Maria Callas as Norma, Ebbe Stignani as Adalgisa, Mario Del Monaco as Pollione, and Giuseppe Modesti as Oroveso. When people think of 1955, Norma, Maria Callas, they think of the performance from La Scala, which is from, the 7th of December. They very often forget this one, conducted by Serafin, from the 29th of June, 1955. But it's for good reason. Obviously, Callas is in better form there. She's much more wild and much more interpretational there. But this one is not a bad recording at all. From June, it's not bad at all. Callas is more subdued here, is more interpretive, is more soft singing. It's less outspoken, so to speak, a Norma than the live one from a few months later. But the singing here is interpretive and is of a very high quality, like any other of her normas. Ep.8's Allegisa here is, well, better than the 54 studio. Not as good as the 52 live in London with Carlos, but this one is still a very good Allegisa by Stignani. Del Monaco Espolione here may be a bit, a bit discouraged by the radio broadcast conditions, similar to studio conditions. He isn't, at his best here. He doesn't sing with most voice. He doesn't sing with the most voice that he could, which he does in the La Scala performance. And Modesti is well, a good Oroveso, a soft-toned one, but is not as deep and interpretive as the Arias. So, all things considered, I can see why it's overshadowed by the La Scala one, but this one is not a bad recording as well. Next, we have a recording from 1956. It is conducted by Franco Rione from the Teatro Municipal de Rio de Janeiro. It has Antonietta Stella as Norma, Elena Nicolai as Algisa, Mario del Monaco as Polione, and Plinio Clabasi is Oroveso. I've never understood why, from the, very famous recordings of Norma from the 50s, this one from 1956 is so often forgotten. Antonietta Stella as Norma here is, this is one of the best, I've heard her sing. Some would argue that Norma is not her role. I can see where they're coming from, but I think that Norma gives her an opportunity to be much more emotional, to be much more, outwards in terms of interpretation, because my image of Antonietta Stella by listening to her other recordings is that she's a very cardboard, very, monotonous soprano with not much interpretation going on. But here as Norma, she brings out the most of her interpretational singing, most of her vocal acting, and this is a demonstration of how Stella can actually sing and interpret roles with dramatic temperament and with nuance. She also takes a high D here at the end of Act 1, which I believe is the highest note that she sung. It is a very powerful high D. I did not expect that at all the first time I've heard this recording. I did not expect such a powerful high D from Stella, but she takes it. Elena Nicolai here as Algisa. She is out of form here. Well, of course, she's getting old, the vibrato is getting wider and looser, but the beauty of tone is still intact. It still has the very soft and nuanced tone, a very rounded tone, that's still there. Del Monaco's Polione here, a very, very good recording of his Polione again. He tends to do so in live recordings, and it's very exciting, very, very visceral singing and very loud, very, very exciting performance of his Polione. Plinio Clabasi as Oroveso is not bad at all, and he's another very underrated bass. He has a beautiful timbre, he has a dark and deep voice, and he uses that to his advantage in the role of Oroveso. Next, we have a recording from 1963, which is Joan Sutherland's debut as Norma. It is from the Vancouver Opera, conducted by Richard Bonning. It has Marilyn Horne as Algisa, John Alexander as Polione, and Richard Cross as Oroveso. All three of these are dreadful. I don't care about that. I'm just here for Sutherland's singing. Because, well, in my humble opinion, I don't think that Joan Sutherland was among the best Normas of all time. Not close. But her Norma here, you can hear it sung with exciting, an exciting visceral quality that we don't often get from her later performances after she's done all the Baroque and shit, yeah? Here, she actually has a dramatic temperament, and a very big voice, obviously. It's still lacking in nuance and interpretation in some places, which has always been the case for Sutherland. But it is very exciting singing here, and she does a tremendous high D at the end of the at the finale of Act 1. and it is a very, very loud note, and which blows you away. And all things considered, it's normal that you don't have that much interpretation in a debut performance of a role, but her voice does fit, Norma well when she was young, and this is something that you might want to listen to if you're just convinced that Sutherland will not be any good in any roles bigger than like Lakme. Yeah. Next, this is not a single recording. Actually, this is a bunch of them. Why I've considered them overlooked recordings is because, well, all of these that I'm about to mention has Montserrat Caballé in the title role of Norma, and these are just all completely overlooked because of the presence of video recordings of Caballé in the title role. But these audio recordings are not, bad at all as well. I've chosen from about 10 of the audio recordings of Caballé's Norma. I've chosen 5. The first one is from 1970. It is from the Teatro Liceo of Barcelona, and this was her role debut as Norma. It has Fiorenza Cosotto as Alogisa, Bruno Prevedi as Polione, and Ivo Vinco as Oroveso. The second one I've chosen is from 1973 from the Metropolitan Opera, conducted by Carlo Felice Cillario again. Cosotto repeats her role as Adalgisa, and Carlo Cosuta is Polione, Giorgio Tozzi is Oroveso. For a third one, it is from the same year, 1973, but this time it's from Napoli, and it features Viorica Cortez as Adalgisa, as well as Pier Miranda Ferraro as Polione, and Agostino Ferrin as Oroveso. A fourth inclusion is from 1977 from the Wiener Staatsoper, with Riccardo Muti conducting. Cosotto and Cosuta repeat their roles, and Luigi Roni is Oroveso this time. For our last of these 5, it is from 1978 from Covent Garden, conducted by Jesus Lopez Cobos. Adalgisa is Grace Bombry, Pedro La Virgen is Polione, and David Ward is Oroveso. Now I would say that from these 5, Caballé does an equally good job as Norma, as compared to, the 72 Scala recording I've mentioned earlier. Her Norma was very much consistent, it stayed the same. Her best Normas would be 2 of them on video from 1974, but all of the video recordings I will talk about later in the 4th category. Back to these audio recordings though. These 5 pretty much showcase Caballé as a consistent Norma. There isn't, very big fluctuations going on with her voice as Norma, and all things considered, all 5 of these are equal to the 72 Gavazzeni that I've talked about earlier. Half of it is absolutely superb, and the other half of the role is just a bit underwhelming. I've talked about that already. For the rest of the casts in these recordings, Cosotto is still a very good Alogisa. I've already talked about that. Bruno Prevedi and Ivo Vinco in the 1970 recording is I've talked about that. They're still very good here. That 1970 recording also features Jose Carreras in his debut as an adult, singing Flavio here. That is probably the furthest he should have gotten to in terms of sing opera, but I'm not going to talk about that here. For the 1970 at the Metropolitan, Carlo Cosuta is a very, very good Polione. He has a very solid voice. He has a dramatic temperament, an Italian voice, and all of that is there. Giorgio Tozzi as Oroveso, very lyrical bass voice. I absolutely love it. The one at Napoli from the same year, Viorica Cortez, falls a bit short as Alogisa. A more soprano-ish voice, similar to Cosotto, but lacking a bit in lyricism, I would say. Pier Miranda Ferraro is a great tenor, even more so than Cosuta, and his Polione is absolutely dramatic-oriented, very Stentonian voice, and I love that. Agostino Ferri, nothing special as Oroveso. For the one from 1977, at Vienna Stadtschaubar, Cosotto and Cosuta are still in good form here. Luigi Roni is another great Oroveso, although not as lyrical, but he has a very dark and deep bass voice, which is suitable for the role. For our last one from 1978, Grace Bombury is Adalgisa, a role that I feel fits her very much because she had a very good soprano extension and a kind of nervous sensitive quality there, and it's a pleasure to listen to, honestly. Pedro La Virgen as Buglione, a excellent lyric tenor voice, a bit lacking in volume and dramaticism, but I'll let that slide. And David Ward as Oroveso is another excellent bass that I love, another dark and resonant voice. For our last inclusion in this category, this is a studio recording from 1984 with John Sutherland as Norma, Montserrat Caballé as Adalgisa, Luciano Pavarotti as Polione, and Samuel Raimi as Oroveso. Some of you would argue that it's not necessarily an ignored recording, but I feel like it's overshadowed by the 1964 studio recording with Sutherland also in the title role. I'll talk about that later and why you shouldn't get that one. But this one from 1984 is a decent set, I would say. Obviously, Caballé switches to Adalgisa here. She has what it takes to sing the role because, well, I feel like Adalgisa is much more of a fit than Norma is for Caballé. Why I'm saying that is because while Norma has one half of the role that is soft and lyrical singing, with those beautiful harmonies, fil di voces, all of those which are playing to Caballé's strengths and advantages, while the other half is all dramatic singing and powerful blasted high notes. Well, Adalgisa is basically Norma, but without the second half that I mentioned, which makes it the perfect role for Caballé. Sutherland here as Norma, I'm still not convinced, and especially as late as 1984, where her voice is running out. Obviously, she didn't handle the high, the powerful blast and dramatic chest voice, all those full dramatic soprano parts. She doesn't handle that very well late in her career, but she still sings, softly with nuance, especially in the duets with Caballé, where she really brings out the nuance in her voice, and it is a heavenly blend, and I love that. Luciano Pavarotti as Polione, too small a voice for the role, but the nuance is there, the lyricism is there, but it's too small a voice. It benefits from studio conditions though, so I'll let that slide. It's not necessarily a bad recording of Polione per se, and Samuel Raimi is also a very good Oroveso, a bit more sharp edged, a bit less rounded and dark, but it is still a very good recording of the role of Oroveso. All around, it's much better than the 64 Bonning recording, which I will explain later why it's not good. Well then, our next category, video recordings. The first one we have here is from 1967, from Berlin. Eleanor Ross is Norma, Giovanna Viri is Adalgisa, Mario Del Monaco is Polione, and Massimiliano Malaspina is Oroveso. Now, Eleanor Ross is a very, very good soprano. I think that Turandot is a bit, too cold for her, but Norma is the perfect role for Eleanor Ross. Most of us remember her for her Don Giovanni disaster. If you know, you know. But she is actually a very, very good soprano. She has a very, dark voice, a voluminous one, a one with depth, with a very, very gorgeous, dark coloring to the voice, and it is a very good one. She can sing, gently with she can sing with piano. She has a very good interpretation. She has, it's all around a very good Norma, and one that is very, very, unfairly forgotten. Giovanna Vigi as Adalgisa. She is is not as dark as NORMA, which isn't, a very good sign for an Adalgisa. But she sounds like Cosotto, and she has the lyricism and the interpretation of Cosotto. So I would say that overall, she is a decent Adalgisa as well. Mario Del Monaco is Pollione here. It seems that Del Monaco has a video recording of every single thing he sung. I don't know why, but that just seems like it's the case. And his Pollione here, although a bit, past his prime, it is still very vocally solid. He skips the top notes in his big aria, but he hits all the B flats, B naturals in the duets and scenes. He just probably wanted to avoid a solo high note, which he always tried to avoid. Massimiliano Malaspina is also nothing out of the ordinary as Oroveso, but all in all, it's a very good recording in terms of having a videotaped recording to it. Now we come to the video recordings of Montserrat Caballé in the title role of Norma. There are 5 of them, but first of all, before I introduce them, I will suggest that you stay clear from the one from 1977 from La Scala. The rest of the 4 that I will introduce and I suggest you get is from 1974 at Orange, 1974 again at Bolshoi, 1978 from Madrid, and 1982 from the Macerata Festival. First one from 1974 is from the Orange Festival, the very famous Orange Norma. Josephine Visi is Adalgisa here, John Vicker is Pollione, and Agostino Ferrin is Oroveso. The second one from 1974 is from the Bolshoi Theatre, with Francesco Molinari Pradelli conducting. Bruna Baglioni is Adalgisa, Gianni Raimondi is Pollione, and Ivo Vingo is Oroveso. The third one, and this is from 1978 from Teatro de la Zarzuela, Madrid. It is conducted by Enrique Garcia Asensio. Adalgisa here is Fiorenza Cosotto. Pollione is Pedro La Virgen, and Oroveso Ivo Vingo. Let's talk about the first ones, shall we, from 1974. Out of these 2, everyone just goes crazy over the Orange performance. I personally consider the Bolshoi one the superior one. Firstly, there's the singing. Obviously, the Orange is so famous because Caballé pours her soul out in that performance. Interpretive-wise, I think it is superior to the Bolshoi. But the Bolshoi one has, more solid singing in terms of the dramatic parts. And for the soft parts, Caballé, she pours out more gorgeous fil di voces, pianissimos. She floats the vocal lines of Bellini more so than she does in the Orange performance. And then there's the problem of the casting. At Orange, Josephine Visi as Adalgisa is not very convincing. She was a small voice and a soprano-ish one. You would also argue that Cosotto was also a soprano-ish voice, but Visi lacks the lyricism and the interpretive quality of Cosotto's Adalgisa. John Vickers as Pollione is another miscasting because he could do held in tenor roles well, but Pollione, I consider it a bit too dry and monotonous for the role of Pollione. It's too German, cardboard German held in tenor, and not Italian dramatic red hot temperament. Yeah, Agostino Ferrin as Oroveso is nothing special, but if we look at the Bolshoi recording, it first of all it has Gianni Raimondi as Pollione, whose Pollione I've already mentioned and is one of the greatest Polliones that you would ever hear. The lyricism in the natural lyric tenor timbre plus the dramatic temperament is not something that Vickers would ever achieve. Yeah, and Baglioni, although Baglioni is not particularly great, she is better than Visi. Cosotto was originally scheduled to sing this performance, but she pulled out after the first night, which is on audio recording but not video. This video from the second night has Bruno Baglioni, which is not great, but it's better than Visi. Also, Ivo Vinco is similar, if not a bit better than Ferin. So all things concerned, I would prioritize the Bolshoi recording over the Orange one from the same year. Then we have the 1978 from Madrid. Although Caballé is in a bit of a decline here, I wouldn't say it is a particularly obvious decline. And Cosotto, La Virgen, and Vinco are much better here. La Virgen is better than Vickers for sure, and Cosotto is better than both Bagliani and Baglioni and Visi. Yeah. Then we have one from 1982, the Macerata Festival. Fiorenza Cosotto is Adalgisa, Giuseppe Giacomini is Polione, and Ivo Vinco is Oroveso. It's conducted by Carlo Felice Cillario. Thing is, Caballé and Cosotto are not in the best voice here. Their singing here is a little bit subdued. They don't sing with their full voices, and well, it's an outdoor arena, and they are in decline, in sharp decline. The singing here is still of acceptable quality, not, at the very end of their decline. But the quality of the singing is not as good as the previous ones I mentioned for Caballé and Cosotto. However, Giacomini as Polione is much better than, either Vickers or La Virgen. Not better than Raimondi, I would say, but Giacomini is a really good tenor. And yeah, all things concerned, this is also a good recording. But the one that I suggest you avoid out of these 5 recordings is one from 1977. It is from La Scala, conducted by Gianandrea Gavazzeni. Why? The cast isn't very good, because Tatiana Troianos, Giorgio Lamberti, and Carlo Zardo are 3 inept leads, and for our other recordings, we the other leads are taken by decent singers. Here, Tatiana Troianos is too small a voice, and she is a bit unrefined, because she has to artificially increase her volume and scream through and yell through the very beautiful vocal lines of Bellini, and that's not what you want. Also, Giorgio Lamberti as Polione is a very dry and uninspiring voice. Carlo Zardo is a weak Oroveso. So all things considered, this from 1977 is the only one out of the 5 Caballé video recordings that I would suggest you avoid. Then we have a recording from 1981. This is conducted by Richard Boning at Toronto, with Tatiana Troianos as Algiza, Francisco Ortiz as Polione, and Justino Diaz as Oroveso. I've said that I'm not a fan of Troianos. This still holds the same here in this performance. Sutherland is a bit, in vocal decline here, but this is the best we've got on video, yeah? Although Francisco Ortiz is a good Polione for the 80s, he has a decent spinto voice with the suitable dramatic temperament, and Justino Diaz is a very good voice, singing lyric bass roles, and Oroveso is another one that he sings well, with nuance, with a rounded tone. And there is also another one of a video recording with Boning and Sutherland. This one is from 1978 from Sydney, but I prefer the 81 to the 78, because in the 78, the rest of the cast is absolutely terrible. Margareta Elkins as Adalgisa is a very weak and very small voice. Ronald Stevens as Polione is unlistenable, a very ugly voice. He's just yelling. And Clifford Grant is also very weak as Oroveso. Although Sutherland sings better in the 1978 recording than the Sydney one, but the rest of the cast is better in the Canadian one, which is why I would recommend the 81 video recording and not the 78. Next, we have a performance from 1987, conducted by Zoltan Peshko. It is from Teatro di San Carlo di Napoli. Norma is Rena Dimitrova, Adalgisa Maria Dragoni, Pollione is Nunzio Todisgo, and Oroveso is Mario Luperi. This has got to be one of the weirdest casting decisions of all time. Rena Dimitrova, who was singing Amneris in 1987, sings the higher role of Norma. Maria Dragoni, who was doing Amina and Lucia in 1987 with high Fs, sings the lower role of Adalgisa. Whoever was behind this is probably very high, or they have absolutely no idea what they're doing. Well, let's just say that Dimitrova is a good Norma. She has the legato, she has the dynamic control. Sometimes it's a bit too unrefined, but for a voice the size of hers, who was already doing mezzo repertoire at this age, it is a decent, approach at the role of Norma. It's decently sung, the notes are there, the powerful notes are there, just a little bit lacking in refinement. Dragoni is a different story. Well, Dragoni, a very notorious singer, doing Lucia and Turandot at the same time, and just eventually wrecking her voice. It is an absolute train wreck of a voice in a later career. This was rather early in her career, I would say, but she is still a very small voice, I would say, very small voice here. She was never a big voice, and she's still singing nowadays with that train wreck of a voice. Oh God. But yeah, she's a bit more listenable here than she is today, obviously, because she hadn't wrecked her voice completely yet, but it's still bad here. Nunzio Todisco, however, as Pollione, a decent spinto tenor, in terms of the 80s, is already very good, yeah? And he sings with he sings with intention here. He sings with dramatic temperament, and all of that is there. The rest of the cast is not very good. The video quality is not very good, but that's the best we can get in terms of video recordings and recordings from the 80s. We also have one from 1988, conducted by Pinchas Steinberg, from Monte Carlo. Norma is Shirley Verrett. Adalgisa Susan Menzer, Pollione is Mario Malagnini, and Oroveso is Bonaldo Giaiotti. Shirley Verrett. I've always considered Shirley Verrett a natural soprano and not a true mezzo, because during the years where she sung both mezzo and soprano roles, you can clearly hear that she's more comfortable doing the soprano repertory. She could sing, Lady Macbeth's high D flat perfectly. She could sing, those soprano roles perfectly. She could sing Tosca perfectly. And by the time she started doing soprano roles, it was already too late to revert back to mezzo roles, because her voice had thinned out to become a 100% soprano voice. And here, she does the role of Norma. I believe this was her last Norma. It's on tape, but, well, let's just say that her singing isn't at her best here. The voice is thin. It's not at her very best, but it is still a convincing interpretation of Norma for the 80s, all things concerned. The opulence and the transparency of the tone is there. The dynamics are there. She can navigate through the coloratura passages properly. The rest of the cast is okay, I would say. Susan Menzer is she's an average Adalgisa, just no wow factor for me. Mario Malagnini as Pollione, a very good voice. I'm surprised I haven't heard of him before. A very good spinto voice, similar to that of Todisco's or Kecele's, or to a lesser extent Giacomini's from that age. A very good tenor and a very good Pollione. The spinto voice, the sharp edge is there. And Bonaldo Giaiotti is one of my favorite basses. His Oroveso is sung with beauty of tone, a rounded tone, a dark and deep bass voice, and all that you want from a proper old school bass, yeah? But let's get to ones that are even less impressive than this one. These are commercially available recordings to avoid. And let's start off with one from 1964, the Bonding recording that I've talked about. It's in studio and it has the same cast as the Sutherland debut Norma from Vancouver 1963. It has the same cast, the rest of the cast, namely Marilyn Horne, John Alexander, and Richard Cross, are equally terrible here. Sutherland's Norma here is, well, the studio conditions don't help. It just takes away the size of the voice that she has while singing these kind of big roles live. It takes away the size of the voice, and that is literally the only reason why Sutherland's Norma would appeal to anyone, is because she sounded big. And in studio, that's toned down. She didn't have a big voice, and she didn't sound big in studio, and the rest of the cast is equally terrible. And just all things concerned, it's not a good recording. And if you're a fan of Sutherland, or you're curious to hear Sutherland's Norma, just go for the one in her role debut. That one is showcasing a much bigger voice of hers, or at least it sounds much bigger, and the high notes are much better there as well. Our second recording, not to get, is from 1967 in studio. Silvio Varviso conducts the Santa Cecilia Orchestra and Chorus. Elena Suliutis is Norma, Fiorenza Cosotto is Adalgisa, Mario Del Monaco is Polione, Carlo Cava is Oroveso. The cast doesn't seem bad at all, but the problems here are quite evident. Firstly, Mario Del Monaco never ever took advantage of studio conditions, and his voice is extremely toned down here. It's not exciting. It's not the kind of hair-raising voice that you would expect from Del Monaco and that you would get from hearing him live or in live recordings. No, it's not a good recording of Poliona, simply because it's in studio. Carlo Cava as Oroveso, he also had a very big voice and also did not, take advantage, did not capitalize on the studio conditions. Fiorenza Cosotto as Adalgisa is acceptable here, but again, in studio, I'm just not very convinced by her reading of Adalgisa here as compared to her live Adalgisas, where she sounds more lyrical and has, a more natural tone. She sounds forced in studio. And Elena Suliutis as Norma. Suliutis is a good singer. I've always insisted that she was, but she was a very inconsistent one, as most of you should know. There is a very infamous train wreck of a Norma sung by Suliutis in the same year, 1967, live at Carnegie Hall. This one in studio, obviously you can't, record a train wreck in studio without, having the conductor telling you to go again. But she just goes over and over and over again, I believe, in studio, and just none of them were, a particularly good record. She doesn't sing well here, and a lot of her notes are pasted, and it's very awkward to listen to, very unnatural to listen to. She did have some good Normas live, one from Piacenza from the same year, and one from 1971 with Caccielle and Cosotto from Tokyo. But this studio one is not a good Norma of hers, and it's not a good recording, all things concerned. The third set that I would recommend you steer clear from is from 1972 in studio, conducted by Carlo Felice Cillario with the London Philharmonic Orchestra. Norma is Montserrat Caballé, Adalgisa Fiorenza Cosotto, Polione is Placido Domingo, and Oroveso is Ruggero Raimondi. Now, this set is particularly problematic. I've included, various recordings of Caballé and Cosotto in Norma and Adalgisa in these roles, respectively. I've included quite a few of them early in this video. Then why not get this one? Firstly, Cosotto, I've said that she's forcing her voice to sound like a mezzo in studio in order to give off the illusion that she is actually a mezzo, in opposed to sounding natural and lyrical live. That's one thing, and she doesn't sound good in this recording because she forces her voice. Cavalier as Norma is pretty much the same case, because Cavalier always wanted to force her voice to sound like she was a dramatic soprano, and justified her doing the dramatic repertoire. And in the studio, she tried to do that as much as possible and forced her voice as much as possible. And that is why it is unnatural, and it sounds much more stiff and unpleasant to listen to when opposed to her live, very natural, very flowing Norma. This one in studio is bad. Placido Domingo Espolione. Again, Domingo never ever recorded well in studio. Even if he could, fix his high notes in studio, and replace them with alternately recorded ones, it doesn't matter, because the nasality of his voice is extremely amplified whenever he recorded in studio. And Ruggero Raimondi as Oroveso, he's not a bass, he is at most a baritone, and he has no business doing bass repertoire at all. And again, this is in studio, and that's why he wants to cause the illusion that he is actually a true bass, and that's why he forces his voice, and the result is a very ugly and very unpleasant sound. So yeah, this one is not a good recording of Norma. Next is a recording from 1973, conducted by James Levine, with the New Philharmonia Orchestra in studio. Beverly Sills is Norma, Shirley Verrett is Adalgisa, Enrico Di Giuseppe is Polione, and Paul Pliszka is Oroveso. Beverly Sills, no, I don't understand why she constantly tried to push her limits and sing as big a role she could possible. And Norma is just not a role that she could handle, even in studio. It's way too small a voice, and she has to yell through those big scenes, because obviously Norma, one half of it is extremely dramatic. Even though if she could navigate those coloratura passages without any issue, the big dramatic scenes, she could never have enough volume for those. Same goes for Enrico Di Giuseppe, way too small a voice for a spinto / dramatic tenor role such as Polione. At most a lyric tenor. I think he's more of a leggero or even a comprimario tenor, and that is not very good at all when you try to sing a role like Polione, as heavy as that. Shirley Verrett as Adalgisa is, well, the only good thing about this recording. She sounds decent here, but if you have Sills and Enrico Di Giuseppe as your partners, they don't matter, because Adalgisa has, absolutely, she has no solo scenes, yeah? And that's why when you slap Di Giuseppe and Beverly Sills next to her, in her scenes, it's never worth listening to. And Paul Pliszka as Oroveso is also nothing out of the ordinary. And then the last one in this category is again conducted by James Levine with the Philharmonic Orchestra. Norma is Renata Scotto, Adalgisa Tatiana Troianos, Polione Giuseppe Giacomini, and Oroveso is Paul Pliszka again. Giacomini is an amazing tenor. It's just such a shame that you throw him into this absolutely shit recording, because Giacomini is a dramatic tenor, a Stentonian one, with very dramatic sounds, very dark and penetrating sound, and that's what you want in Napoleone. Unfortunately, the rest of this recording is absolute shit. Renata Scotto as Norma. It's pretty self-explanatory, isn't it? Nothing coming out of Scotto's mouth from the 70s onwards was listenable. This is not an exception. She has a way too small a voice for anything close to Norma, and like 5 or 10 years into her career, main career, I would say, because she made her debut in 1953. Like from the 70s onwards, she was just screaming in every single recording and every single live performance we could hear. And it is a very, very, very ugly sound. It is the exact opposite of the elegant and mysterious druidess priestess that Norma is. No. Tatiana Troyanos as Adalgisa, I've already talked about that. Poor Plishka, also nothing out of the ordinary here. And it is such a shame because Giacomini is such a great tenor, and very, very rarely was he contracted to do commercial recordings. This was a one of the rare occurrences where he was contracted to do a studio recording, a commercial one, but the rest of the cast is just absolutely dog shit. Hey, but back to the better ones, shall we? Category 6, good recordings of arias, scenes, and excerpts. The first one we'll start off is one from 1949. It is conducted by Tullio Serafin, with Carlos and Norma, Fedora Barbieri as Algisa, and Nicola Rosi Lemeni from Oroveso. There's about 13 minutes of excerpts from here. There's the Casta Diva and the first Adalgisa Norma duet. They're from two different dates, but that doesn't really matter. Carlos is in very, very good voice here, obviously. 1949, from Argentina. We have like 2 minutes of her Turandot with Delmonico, and we have 30 something minutes here in Norma, so that's a big improvement. And of course, she is in very good voice, very exciting singing. The Casta Diva has its nuances, but the true star of this recording is her cabaletta, Bello Meritorna. I think this is her best Norma cabaletta that she recorded, and it is exciting. The top notes are absolutely powerful. They're blasted at full volume, a full-bodied Norma, and all things considered, it's a precious historical document, and it showcases Carlos in very good voice. The next recording we have here is from 1953, conducted by Antonino Votto, from Trieste. Carlos is Norma, Elena Nicolai is Algisa, Franco Corelli is Bolione, and Boris Christoph is Oroveso. We have about an hour and 30 minutes of excerpts here, which is half of the opera, more than half of that. Well, Carlos here is in very good form, so is Nicolai and Corelli. Carlos Norma here, although not as good as the 52 in London and 55 in Scala in terms of interpretation and nuanced singing, this is perhaps her most wild and unrestrained Norma. I've played a bit of her in mia man al fin to say that this particular phrase at the start of the video, it's from this recording, and it's her best in mia man, in my opinion. And well, Elena Nicolai, yeah, what a mezzo voice. I absolutely love her voice. A very big one, voluptuous one, and here she goes absolutely wild as well in some places, but the beauty of tone is intact, and she isn't in as much a decline as she is in the 56 Rio recording. Franco Aurelius Polione here, very young, just a few years into his opera career, a bit of a caprino here, a very fast vibrato, which he considered a vocal flaw, but a very young Corelli and a very fresh and very young voice here, atypical of the sorrowful, pensive Corelli voice. No, this is different. This is fresh, and a very good pairing with Carlos in terms of the excitement of their singing here. So yeah, overall, a very good recording, and it is a major fragment of the opera as well. So yeah. Our third one is not a complete recording, but instead 3 incomplete recordings of Hencher's Norma from 1965. The first one is from the 3rd of February 1965. It's from Napoli, conducted by Fernando Previtali. Actually, this recording exists in its entirety, but I haven't been able to find it. I know it exists because it's on sale online, but I don't have the money for that. So what I have are just a few excerpts that run for about an hour. But I think that this in Napoli is her most gentle and nuanced Norma, because she has that trademark pianissimo where she floats it. She does a lot of that here in Napoli, which we don't get much at La Scala, Buenos Aires, and Verona. Verona I'll talk about later. Napoli here, yeah, she floats those notes very ethereally. It is a transcendent experience listening to these excerpts of Norma. Gianfranco Checele, a very good tenor as well. Reminds me of Delmonico, a very good spinto voice, if not a bit too monotonous, too cardboard, but a very exciting voice. Ivo Vinco is Oroveso, decent, but Cosotto here, as Adalgisa, is in very, very good form. Her Mira o Norma from Napoli here with Hencher is, I believe, one of the best versions of this duet that I've heard. And all things considered, this is very good recording. And let's move on to the next ones with Hencher. These are 2 recordings from Verona, Arena di Verona, conducted by Gianandrea Gavazzeni. The first one is from the 24th of July, and it has Cosotto, Prevedi, and Vinco. It has the last 20 minutes from Act 1, and then we have another one, also from Verona, from the same one, but this one is a later night, 5th of August 1965, with the same cast, but this one runs for just short of 2 hours. This one is, this Norma from Verona is her most wild one. She goes absolutely mad. The I Romani accento accento that I've played at the start of this video is from this second night of Verona, and it is crazy. She goes wild here in this Verona performance. So to sum it all up, the 65 Scala is the most vocally secure, and in terms of the excerpts, the 65 Napoli is the most nuanced, and the 65 Verona, the second night, is the most wild one. But I don't care. All of these, including the Buenos Aires from 1964, are all incredible versions of Hencher's Norma that you should definitely listen to. Now, I would like to talk about 3 recordings of Casta Diva sung by Carlos. The first one is from 1949 in a studio recital from Turin, Rai Turin. I think that this is her best Casta Diva after the 55 La Scala. She is very, very subdued here, I would say. Maybe because of the studio conditions, but she's very subdued here, and she brings out a lot of nuances in that introverted and very secretive singing, I would say. She presents a facade of Norma that we haven't heard in her other recordings of Casta Diva and other recordings of this role. And this one is very good recording, very soft, and it has a marbly tone to it, which we don't often get in other recordings. Then the second individual recording of Casta Diva from Callas is from 1957. This one is on tape, and it is in the Rai TV studios conducted by Santini. What about this? It doesn't showcase Callas in her best voice, but the nuance here is it is very nuanced. It has the, you know, openness of tone. It isn't the most transparent of tones, but it is a gorgeous legato. It is a gorgeous rounded tone. And for our last individual recording of Callas Casta Diva, we come to 1958 in concert at Paris. This was her debut at the Paris Opera, and this is among the top 3 best Casta Divas that she had sung. This one at Paris is a bit more clear, more transparent in terms of tone, a bit more sorrow in her voice, a bit more raw in terms of her delivery. But all 3 of these recordings of Casta Diva are just equally as artistically valuable as her full recordings of Norma. Then we have our last inclusion in this video. These are excerpts of Norma sung by Rosa Ponselle. These consist of Casta Diva, Abelo a me ritorna, Mira o Norma, and Si fino all'ora estreme. The Adalgisa in the Mira o Norma, alongside Ponselle, is Marion Telva. Now, Ponselle singing Norma. I think it's a perfect fit for her voice because she had a very gorgeous rounded tone, marble coloring, and a very opulent tone, so to speak. And it is absolutely perfect for the role of Norma. You can hear her Casta Diva sung with a very rounded, very beautiful marbly tone. Same with Mira Norma. And for the 2 caballettas, the vocal agility is there, the freshness of voice is there, and the power of the voice is also there, yeah? And Marion Telva as Adalgisa is also a similar voice with a gorgeous marble tone, and all of that is a very, very pleasing and pleasant recording to listen to. Anyway, it's been a pleasure making this video as usual, and I look forward to seeing you guys soon in my next video. Peace out.